Mark, how's it going? Good, how are you?
Okay. My colleagues, I got a couple things going on about this.
Welcome everyone to our community presentation with respect to the community-wide survey that went out in the last couple of months. We have representatives of Cobalt Community Research with us, William St. Moore, Executive Director, and Pete Charette, Marketing Analysis. And they are going to be presenting the results from the community-wide survey. The survey was developed in light of the fact that this is the time period in which the Recreation Commission has to update its recreation master plan, and a survey is a necessary element of doing that. In addition, the Planning Commission has to update the city's regular master plan from time to time. And the thought process was to use the survey that was otherwise going to be going out to the Rec Commission to expand that, get additional information for use by the Junior Commission and the City Commission for planning going forward. So with that, I will turn the presentation over to William.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I will have this be very informal, but just to make sure that we have a chance to get all the way through the presentation, I'll go through it first, and then we'll stop, and if you have questions, I'll just bounce back to the various slides that are involved. Let me give you a little bit of background, first of all, on who Cobalt is. We are a 501c3 nonprofit research coalition. We are based here in Michigan, and our mission is really to provide research and education for local units of government, local schools, and other nonprofit research organizations. And the idea of Cobalt and why we were created in the first place is that right now communities need to have very good data, good feedback and connection with the residents in order to make good decisions in terms of resources and to be able to adapt to really the economic and the social changes that are hitting the state, really hitting local governments across the U.S. So research can be very expensive. It can also be easy to get wrong. So we're really created to help communities approach that. This particular study had three main goals. First of all, supporting budget and strategic planning decisions. Second of all, engaging residents. There's a lot of issues going on, making sure that you have a good sense of what the community thinks. Setting budget priorities and measuring service performance to see, is the community doing a good job delivering on those services that residents care about the most. So some background methodology was sent out to just over 1,000 homes, which is a very large sampling, through two distributions back in March, and I think in April as well. Response from 513 respondents, or residents responded. That gives us a margin of error of plus or minus 3.2%. Just to give you a sense, normally when we do surveys with local units of government, the typical response rate is between 25 to 35%. So the fact that 45% of residents responded is a very, very good thing. It means a couple of things. First of all, statistically, it means we've got enough numbers to do some good analysis. The other thing is that it speaks well for the community because often when a response rate is low, that tells us right there that there's some issues going on with the community without even looking to see what the numbers say. So anyways, that's a good thing. Of the 513 responses, about 73% responded by paper and about 27% responded by online. The questions in the surveys, we've worked with a number of different communities across Michigan, across the country. Very similar kind of structure to what we use for communities, really all over. And I'll go through how that's set up in a minute. Again, the outstanding number of responses, the strong response rate, means that the analysis that we're able to do is very solid and gives us a good sense of what the community overall believes. We also can drill down into the information by individual demographic groups so we can see what are the concerns of individual groups within the community. And really the bottom line is that the city really performed well. Service levels for the things that community members care about scored high. Actually all services were pretty high. And the things that are the highest importance are the things that are already being funded. So just a couple of things that went well again. Going into the results, who responded? One of the things that we asked is where people live. And we divided the city up into different regions, and they responded. You can see that there's a pretty even distribution in terms of where people live geographically and how they participated with the survey. Looking at age distribution, again, pretty representative across all groups. Typically, we do see higher response rates in some of the older groups. No exception, it's something that we've seen here, but again, we dig into the detail of the data so we know group by group what are the concerns, what are the priorities, so that no group gets lost with the overall response rate. For example, the younger groups versus the older groups. One of the questions at the beginning of the survey was looking at project priority. And essentially the way the question was set up is we listed a series of projects and we asked residents to pick the top 2 or 3 that they would like to see move forward. And so what this tells you is that the projects over here on this side, and I'll read them in a second, are things that people would like to see move forward. On this side, it's not that they're opposed, it's just that these are things that aren't as much of a priority for folks. They're not as, they don't care about these projects to the same extent as projects over here. And when this question was asked, we also didn't start tying in any sort of resource constraints. So it was mainly just starting the survey to see what their thoughts are top of mind. So as far as the projects that people wanted to start off with from a priority standpoint, we have extension of the infrastructure improvement village to continue upgrades to the infrastructure. Number 2 is continue commercial redevelopment along the east side of Woodward Avenue. Number 3 here is improve pedestrian safety. 4 is issue the state's remaining liquor license to an upscale restaurant like the Cork. And then the 5th over here is pursue consolidation of city services with surrounding communities. So a consolidation theme, emerging services is something that came up several times throughout the survey. When we did the analysis, we had a couple of different questions. First of all, we listed out a series of services that the city provides and programs, and we asked people to rank those, and you'll see those plotted vertically. So the vertical essentially shows you where high satisfaction and lower satisfaction is. Higher satisfaction at the top, lower satisfaction is going to be at the bottom. And then we asked the second question regarding how important is it that the city fund those services. Things with higher importance from a funding perspective will be on the right side, lesser importance will be on the left side. So I know you can't read this particular chart. The main purpose of this chart is just to show you how the things cluster. So if you look at this cluster, what you see are a couple of things. First of all, from a satisfaction standpoint, everything is above the midpoint. So first of all, from a service delivery standpoint, the city's doing a pretty good job. Second piece is from a funding priority standpoint, the things that are a higher funding priority are also the things that the city is doing well. So things that are more important, service level is higher. Things with lesser importance, the service level is lower. So you've got this overall slope that travels in this direction, and that's a good thing. We've worked with some communities where the slope is actually the opposite. Things that people don't really care about are way over here, and the things that they do care about are down here. So this speaks well. What I'm doing now is drilling into these different bubbles by color. So the red is what I'll go into first. That's dealing with safety and maintenance services. So these are things that generally pretty high priority from a funding perspective. The bubble size is showing you how many dollars are going into each of these services. So the larger the bubble, the bigger part of the budget it is. So things that are here, you've got police, it's the largest bubble right up here in the corner. You've got fire, and you've got snow removal here, garbage, street maintenance, can't quite make that up. Curbside pickup, landscaping, blight control, tree maintenance. And over here in the other quadrant, you've got the sidewalk snow removal in the neighborhoods and snow removal in the park. So those are 2 areas. Not spending a lot on it now, lower satisfaction, but lower funding importance. So when you see something like this, there's different things that you do depending on where things land in the quadrants. One of the things is that you've got a lot of expenditures going into this area, which is good because these are funding priorities. However, when you're in an environment where your revenues are being cut, and you have to deal with the reality of less resource, what you want to do is not necessarily just cut dollars from these areas, but you really want to think strategically about how can you structure them, make some administrative changes, make process changes, so that you can still deliver the high service levels, but can you do it at a lower cost? So that's the fundamental question when you've got things that high importance, high funding, so on. If you had some large bubbles over here, it'd be a different story. That one would be relatively easy, because if it's a lower funding priority and you've got a lot of funds going into it, you could move some dollars. But in this situation, you really need to think about efficiencies, process efficiencies, administrative efficiencies. The blue is dealing with activities of enrichment. So some of the things that we see here are the pool, forage facility, library, Gainsborough, and other parks. And again, same sort of thing. Most of the resources are going to the areas that are the higher priorities for the community. Looking at some other city services, postal substation, something that's taken care of itself as far as that particular service, but again, lower priority area, a fair amount of resources going into it. Energy efficient decorative street lighting is here, cable access channel and website, both over here. Again, they're above the midpoint, as you remember from that early slide when I showed everything across the top, but relatively speaking, these are lower satisfaction levels and lower funding importance than some of the other areas. Then looking at some of the DDA services, a couple of them, there's the trolley, DDA concerts, and just to give you a sense, both the satisfaction and the importance of the concerts is significantly higher than the trolley. So as far as weighing one versus the other, this one came out as being a higher priority. So putting everything back together into a single slide, you can see how everything lands in terms of the relative funding size, how many dollars go into these different areas, which areas are higher priorities but aren't necessarily being funded to the same extent, and where there may be some revenue that could be moved around. But mainly, most of the opportunity has to do with looking at some sort of efficiency where you can reduce the cost without necessarily reducing the service levels. So the next set of questions was going through looking at individual services and programs, and we said, okay, we know what your funding priority is, we know what your satisfaction level is, but because we're in a situation where we've got to balance the budget, there are certain types of actions that we need to consider for each of the services that we provide. And so the options that are provided in the survey itself were eliminating the service, reducing service levels, consolidating, or raising taxes. So what I'm going to show you now are a series of slides. We're essentially looking at the percentage of people who specify support for one of those four actions for each of the services. For example, right now we're looking at eliminating the service. So if funds aren't available and something has to be done, the three services that residents say could be eliminated, that they're the most comfortable eliminating: cable, sidewalk snow removal in the parks, sidewalk snow removal in the neighborhoods. Those are really the big three. If we're looking at reducing service levels, so not eliminating, but just reducing what's being done, the three main areas: city website, landscaping, blight control, code enforcement, tree maintenance. Those are the ones that people say can be dialed down if it's in a revenue constrained situation. Raising taxes and fees. Of all of these services, people say police services, they'd be willing to pay more for police services. And you can see here that more than 50% say that. Other services, as far as people being more comfortable with raising taxes, you get snow removal on the main streets and street maintenance. Those are the next two. And then looking at combining with another community. A number of these services are already outsourced, or there's already a sharing arrangement. So this is essentially reinforcing what the city's already doing. But you've got fire services, very high from a combining with another community perspective. Leaf pickup, snow removal, tree maintenance, library services. So those are the ones that are the highest as far as looking at combining in some way, either with another service for administrative savings or with another community. We put all these options together so you can see eliminating service is the blue, the red is reducing service levels, the green is raising taxes, and the blue is consolidation. this essentially creates a pie chart for service by service. So blight control, for example, you can see proportionally that people tend to be most supportive of reducing service levels or combining with another community. So that just gives you a sense, service by service, where people come down generally. And again, the city has the detail on this to look at demographic group by demographic group, or geographical, in which section of the city people live in. Okay. So ultimately, thinking about the characteristics of an ideal community, making sure that things are aligned with the priorities of the residents. Pleasant Ridge is doing a pretty good job. Residents have provided a lot of feedback, and ultimately everyone is interested in making sure the city succeeds. So with that, I will stop, and I'll open for questions regarding the survey itself. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
This might be a dumb question, but when you find inconsistencies, like, and I just walked in, maybe went over this, but, you know, sidewalk snow removal in the parks and in the neighborhoods seem to be a low priority.
Mm-hmm.
But then, you know, they're showing later on, or was it something about like, was this high priority to, you know, combine it with another community or, you know, raise taxes? I mean, snow removal streets, raise taxes was like number 2. So what do you do when you find those? That seems inconsistent to me. What do you do?
There were several different snow removal questions that were involved. So there was snow removal on the streets, which actually had quite a bit of support from a, let's see it on this chart.
It's on the top corner.
Top corner, okay, here it is. Snow removal streets. So that one had a lot of support. But there was also snow removal from the sidewalks in the parks and snow removal from the sidewalks in the neighborhoods. So those were the 2
Oh
areas
yeah,
that
I'm
were
sorry, you're right. Streets and parks were separated.
So it was just, this is the confusion between the 2 different 2. But it was fairly consistent in the different sections that people said this is a priority and they'd be willing to pay a little bit more for it. These ones were lower priority, they'd be more willing either reducing the service levels, eliminating service, or sharing with another community. Yes, sir.
The one finding I found interesting is that in a lot of ways, many of the residents asked to be more informed about things, even on the walk-up comments this evening. But when you look at the priorities there, if our main channels are the cable and the website, it looks like residents don't value it. So,
Sure.
how do you square that inconsistency?
What we've seen with other communities that we've worked with, we've looked at communication preference, and the cable TV, as far as getting their news about local community, and the website tend to be pretty low. Website is higher than the website, or the cable TV channel. But most of the time, people are interested in getting their information through a newsletter, or through mail, or through email, something along those lines, and it's a bit more of a push, as opposed to these things where they would have to find, they'd have to think about it and go to that particular resource. It's more of a pull picture. So generally, push is more popular than a pull. Although website, I wouldn't walk away from it. You might want to think more along the lines of how can I do more push communication, LinkedIn with the website. For example, when the city does a mailing, if there's news blurbs, having short news blurbs, and then say you can go to the website to get more detail on this. You kind of integrate the communication. That's the technique that can leverage the technology and the lower cost of the website, but still get the news out in a more effective way to engage the residents. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
When did they ask about combining services with another community? I assumed it meant with Ferndale, which was a bad assumption. I didn't know that they were considering leaving Ferndale Specialty Fire. So I meant, when I answered, I would consider combining with another community, meaning Ferndale. I wonder how many people would have answered in that same way, thinking that it was discussing Ferndale as the other community and not Berkeley.
Yeah, I can't really respond to that as far as what people might have said. Other than the consolidation generally was pretty strong, including services that were
I can't hear you. I'm
services
sorry.
that were already consolidated were also listed as being a high priority for consolidation. So I think the theme of consolidation generally is strong in the community. Whether there's a preference of consolidating with one community over another community, that part we didn't dive into, so I wouldn't be able to speak to whether it would be Berkeley or Ferndale. That's something that really the city council would need to listen to the community, think about what makes the most sense for the community, and make a decision accordingly. Yes, ma'am.
I had a question too. How, and this may be asking for somebody to predict the future, but how will this information then be used by the commission to make decisions about things like combining services or raising taxes or floating a bond or something like that? I don't know if the,
Scott? Or?
I mean, how was, just wondering how this information would be useful or used by
It's probably the first most comprehensive survey we've had, so we don't have experience in using them yet. But I think that you will find it'll be used at a variety of levels. First of all, as I mentioned at the beginning, a primary reason for doing a survey at this point in time was for the Recreation Commission to be able to update its master plan as required by state law. And certainly, the Recreation Commission will be looking at the answers as they relate to recreation in coming up with a draft plan that will eventually be reviewed before being filed with the state. I think other junior commissions will be using parts that pertain to them. I can't tell you how any given question, set of questions is going to be used in any given situation. And I also think it's something that will be used over a period of several years. We're not going to run out and fund this type of endeavor every year to do the survey. So it's probably looking at a 3 to 5 year period of time, which is about when the master plans get updated.
Thank you.
From a general standpoint, this kind of data is really just one part of a three-legged stool for decision making. So it gives you the qualitative piece that can help you go back to the community and ask more detailed questions on some of the things that came up. For example, the Ferndale versus Berkeley question.
Okay.
So that's one use for it. But this information is also combined with the judgment of your leadership and also the insight of community members. So really all three pieces of information along with regulatory requirements and so on and safety standards. Those are really the pieces that go into any sort of decision generally. And then it also creates a baseline. So if the city goes back and surveys again 3 years or 5 years down the road, they can see where they are today and then they can measure their progress. Have they improved in the areas? Have they dropped in areas? It's just a way of the council holding themselves more accountable and more transparent with some of these services. Other questions?
How do you address the comments? Like, I know there was a part B on that asked for comments. How are those addressed?
There's an open-ended comment sheet, and we took a look at what was in there, and we provided that back. The verbatims are wonderful for getting insight on why people answered the way they did, but we always try to balance those with the quantitative side, because if you have the same comment that comes up 5 times, qualitative information like that tends to really stick in your brain and color your perception. When you've got 500 people that responded a certain way, you've got to make sure that they're balanced. So we don't generally lead with the qualitative questions, but the commission and the leadership does have the verbatims that all the community members wrote down and shared. Other questions?
Pardon me, I just walked in. Is there a book or something that people are looking at that I can?
I believe there's a book out at the door.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Will there be time for questions after the presentation, or I'm just waiting for my husband who may have questions.
Okay.
I know it's supposed to start at 7.
6:30.
It was at 6:30.
Notice I got it 7.
Facebook said
I got a note that
7.
said 7.
Facebook said so.
So did we.
So I can certainly hang around to answer individual questions. Mayor, is there going to be any discussion from a council perspective or other thoughts?
This is not been posted as a council meeting, but
Okay.
people will be around to answer questions, I'm sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we just got here too.
You done with your presentation?
I am done with the presentation.
Thank you again to Cobalt for your assistance in this project. This will be replayed on cable TV, and I understand, Ted, you're making some tapes available for people who may not have cable and may need to look at a tape. There are the materials that were discussed during the presentation in the back of the room, and they also will continue to be available for people to pick up at either City Hall or at the Community Center, Fort Ridge Road. Thank you very much.
So we're gonna start at 6:30. Was that close to that in there? That's what I thought.
Posted
Everything says 7.
and they adjusted it